Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
It is for reasons that I cannot quite explain yet. But I've experienced it in my own life, so I know it at least to be partly true. I cannot quite explain why going to church can be so stressful. Now, I kind of get it. I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. I kind of get it. But I've experienced it in my own life, and I've heard it from too many people to think that it's just an accident or it's isolated. I've heard that time after time. Going to church can be stressful. I remember my own family life growing up. Sunday seemed to be the day where my brother and I fought the most. It started before church. The anxiety started building. But by the time we got home, Steve and I weren't talking to each other over lunch. For some reason, Sunday brought out the worst in us. And every single time it did, my mother's refrain was, "Be nice." We started arguing in the back seat, "Be nice." We got ready to walk into the church. For heaven's sakes, be nice. Don't let people know how messed up we are. She came to get us from Sunday school. We started walking into the sanctuary. Oh, be nice. I've got to go to choir. Be nice. You know that when the teeth grind, be nice? I grew up thinking be nice was the motto of church. It is backed up with a lot of scripture. Be nice. Jesus said, "Do unto others." That sounds a lot like be nice. Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That sounds a whole lot like be nice. And most of my childhood, I thought being a Christian was all about being nice. Like that was the pinnacle of our faith. Like that was what we were striving to be when I stopped finally wrestling with my brother underneath the pews. Being nice was what we were growing into as disciples of Jesus. Being nice seemed like the essence of church. I went to church to learn how to be nice. But just like Paul says in that great chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, you have to put away that childlike way. And I began to understand two things about church as I continue to grow up. First, I came to realize, even the hard way, that not everybody comes to church to be nice. Did you know that? Not everybody comes to church to be nice. I learned that. And thankfully I learned that being nice is not our goal. That's not the great end of the church. It's not who we are called to be. We're not called to simply be nice. That's not what we do here in our worship. But for many years of childhood, I believed in both of these things to be true. That one, people at church were nice. And two, that was what I was growing up to be. So maybe I needed to grow up. Maybe I needed to put away those childlike faiths. Maybe I needed to understand that when my brother and I were kicking after the Apostles' Creed, that I wasn't failing at being a Christian, or we were fighting over the only sharpened pencil in our whole pew after the Lord's Prayer, that was not the end of my discipleship. You know, there's only a handful of stories that find their way into all four Gospels. There's only a handful of them. They include the accounts of the feeding of the 5,000. They include the crucifixion, but there's so many others that you think are in all four, but they're not. Like communion. It's not in all four Gospels. There's only a handful of stories that are, and Jesus clearing the temple is one of them. This is important. This is an important text. This was an important text to all the communities of Christians as the Gospels were being put together and written down. This story was important to all of the Hebrew people that Matthew was writing his Gospel for. This story was important for all the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Christians, as Luke was writing down his Gospel. This was really important for the earliest Christians where Mark was writing, and this was really important later traditions as John finished his gospel to the established communities of faith. Now there are some differences, and if you put them all side by side, you're going to recognize that there are some difficulties here. Several of the things John puts in conflict with the others, but the one thing we can take and understand completely from this, and overwhelmingly agreed upon by all of the gospel accounts, is Jesus was not being nice. Now sometimes it is hard for us to remember since we're so far removed, but this gospel account reminds us that the great temple, the temple of God there in Jerusalem, the temple there is under construction. It was under construction the entirety of Jesus' life. In fact, it started decades before Jesus was born, and it was not finished until decades after Jesus died. The entire time that Jesus walked with his disciples and entered the gates, there was under construction tape. The entire time he was there was scaffolding. It's hard for us to remember this as we hear these accounts because we're so far removed, but the construction tape and the scaffolding were everywhere. This temple was mandated by Herod the Great. You remember him from last week? He commissioned the building of this temple to make the people love him. You know, when he's not killing the children. And to prove that he was a better king than even Solomon himself. He commissioned the great temple. But it was designed, at least in part, by the Sadducees. Remember them? The Sadducees, they held all the power. They held all the money. This was the group that was in charge. They constructed the building for Herod. They said, put this here, make that go there. This is an important part. Herod, who is not a Jewish person, if you want the Jews to love you, put the courtyards here and do this. These vast courtyards were built. Arches were built, gates were built, walls were huge stones that the disciples would marvel at. Only the best, the greatest, the grandeur of this building would be unlike any other. And it was all for weeks like this, the week of Passover, where Jesus comes. Like all of the Jewish people from that area who were within a week's walk would come to Jerusalem. The city's numbers would swell, the population would push against the borders, even into the cities like Bethany and Beth Eden. The population would grow so vast that the Sadducees made sure there would be enough room, and so they built these huge courtyards to hold the capacity of the people on these high holy days when people came to offer sacrifice after their mandatory pilgrimages. Our scene today in John chapter 2 takes place in one of these enormous spaces. This is called the Gentiles' Court. And the size is somewhere between 2 and 3 football fields. This is an enormous space. and it would be filled with people and animals and tables and businesses, all packed inside of this courtyard, ready for the Passover. Now, the animals inside the courtyard had been inspected, they'd been certified and declared to be perfect for sacrifice. And the animals inside the courtyard were also marked up in price. Historians like Josephus tell us that the price markup was sometimes around 15 to 17 times higher than the exact same animal on the other side of the wall. So there was a wall, and the animals on each side had different values. Now that kind of inflation would make movie theater popcorn machines blush. 17 times? But before we simply equate this to just some scene of economics, the buying of ice cream cones at Disney World or getting a Coca-Cola before the Dallas Cowboys game, it's not simply a matter of economy. And if we did remember that, they'd still be way, way off. What we have to remember, what Jesus knows, is that this is not optional. This is mandated by the faith, mandated by those who control the temple. The Sadducees. There was no packing a sandwich before a long trip like my family used to do, so we didn't have to stop at McDonald's because that was way too much money. That's not what this is. This is not about sneaking in Skittles to the Star Wars movie. That's not what this is. There was no wiggle room. This was a system sustained by power and a monopoly that Jesus entered the court this day. One estimate from historians of that time said that the profit would be between, in our numbers, in our present day math, between $150 and $200 million a year. That was taken in by this marketplace. Money that was largely taken in from those who could not bear it. It was oppressive. It was harming God's people. And it only benefited the system that was in place. And Jesus had had enough. Jesus looked around and he saw that the system was rigged. And it hurt the people that Jesus came to love. And Jesus kicked, or he whipped, the courtyard clean. He ran them out. He disrupted the system. He wasn't very nice. And with that, shattered the small box that I had kept God in for a long, long time, that God just wanted me to be nice. And now that's broken. And it's time for me to grow up. That small box of my childhood cannot contain the God who is revealed to us today. When Christ acts here, he calls for another goal of our faith, to seek justice. And seeking justice will often put us at odds with being nice. It's very difficult to hold the two together sometimes. Seeking justice can work in ways that the nice side of our faith never, ever will. This more mature faith puts us often in conflict or stressful circumstances or courtyards of high anxiety. Because justice seeking is dangerous business. It's dangerous business because someone is benefiting from that injustice. Often it requires speaking truth to power, and it must cultivate within each of us an unwavering nerve. And it will cost you something. Tomorrow, we honor Dr. King. He spoke truth to power. He stood in the courtyard of oppressive gates and walls. He stood in places where on one side of the wall it was declared good enough, and on the other side it was not. And he cried out in his life for justice. Justice. And it cost him everything. Seeking justice will cost you. Now, not all of us are called to be Dr. King, but every single one of us is called to seek justice. We are no less bound by our calling as disciples, a people of faith, to seek out justice, to be Christ-like in every court of our life. We're called to stand with those who are taken advantage of in systems that they cannot change, in systems that lay a heavy, undue burden on their backs. That's where we are called, not simply to be nice, but to seek justice. I'll end this sermon today with a great quote from the monk Thomas Merton. He says, "Each one of us has an irrevocable vocation to be Christ. And the Christ that I am supposed to be is irreplaceable. It has to be my vision of Christ, and if I do not fulfill that, there is going to be something missing forever and forever in the kingdom of heaven. And each of us knows this. Each of us feels this." You have an irrevocable vocation. And as mature Christians who have shattered long ago the box of simply being nice, you must seek justice. You must speak truth to power. You must be Christ-like, even when it means picking up the whip. Your calling, your vocation as Christ is much more than simply being nice. And if that's all that you have had these many years, it is time to put that aside. Because the world is much too dangerous for Christians to simply be nice. Your calling is to seek justice, and it is irreplaceable. So don't confuse your faith with not kicking your brother. Don't confuse your faith with not speaking over lunch. Don't confuse your faith of trying to find the sharpened pencil in the pew. Don't confuse it for being nice. Let us seek justice.